The Vietnam War was one of the deadliest proving grounds for modern air combat. On paper, American pilots had the edge. Advanced jets like the F-4 Phantom, powerful bombers, and helicopter gunships that could dominate the battlefield. But once they crossed into enemy skies, all that technology met a storm of danger. Below, the jungles hid radar-guided guns and Soviet-supplied missiles. In the air, MiG fighters lurked, directed by ground controllers who always seemed to know where the Americans were coming from. Every mission carried the same question: would the pilot make it back, or would the sky claim another crew? For the men strapped into those cockpits, it wasn't about heroics. It was about enduring heat, flak, missiles, and the constant risk of being shot down over enemy territory. In this video, we'll uncover why being a pilot in Vietnam was less about glory and more about sheer survival. The skies over Vietnam were supposed to showcase America's overwhelming air power. The US brought fleets of bombers, advanced fighters, and thousands of helicopters, believing that sheer firepower could bend the war in their favor. From the start, air campaigns like Operation Rolling Thunder aimed to cripple North Vietnam's ability to fight by targeting supply lines, infrastructure, and military bases. But the enemy was far from helpless. North Vietnam, with heavy support from the Soviet Union and China, built one of the most dense and dangerous air defense networks the world had ever seen. Radar-guided anti-aircraft artillery was hidden in the jungles, camouflaged beneath trees and huts. Entire valleys bristled with guns, waiting to unleash walls of steel on anything that flew overhead. And then came the missiles. Soviet-supplied SA-2 guideline surface-to-air missiles began to arrive in large numbers by the mid-1960s. These towering weapons could strike jets at altitudes of 60,000 feet, forcing American pilots to fly lower, right into the range of anti-aircraft fire. Even heavily armed Phantoms and Thunder Chiefs found themselves vulnerable, dodging missile trails that cut across the sky like fiery spears. The geography of Vietnam only added to the danger. Thick jungles, rugged mountains, and hidden trails meant that enemy forces could move anti-aircraft guns and missile launchers almost anywhere. Pilots never knew where the next ambush might come from. A seemingly quiet valley could suddenly erupt with tracers and missile launchers. For American crews, each mission was a gamble. Even with advanced jets, the odds were brutal. The Vietnam War quickly became one of the deadliest environments for pilots in modern history, a place where skill, training, and technology often weren't enough to guarantee survival. The Vietnam War became a showcase of some of the most advanced aircraft of the era, but even the best designs were pushed to their limits. The backbone of US air power was the F-4 Phantom II. Fast, heavily armed, and versatile, it could dogfight MiGs, drop bombs, and escort other aircraft. Yet, in Vietnam's skies, its weaknesses were exposed. The early Phantoms lacked a built-in gun, leaving pilots to rely on missiles that often malfunctioned in combat. Against nimble MiG-7s and MiG-20s, the Phantom's size and weight made survival a constant challenge. Another workhorse was the F-105 Thunder Chief, nicknamed the Thud. Designed as a nuclear strike aircraft, it was repurposed for bombing runs over North Vietnam. Flying low and fast, Thuds took enormous risks, diving straight into the densest anti-aircraft defenses. Loss rates were staggering, and pilots often joked grimly that the F-105 was the only jet that delivered itself to the target. For all weather strikes, the Navy relied on the A-6 Intruder. With advanced radar and navigation systems, it could bomb through cloud cover or at night. But its slow speed and heavy profile made it a tempting target for enemy gunners. High above, the massive B-52 Stratofortresses dropped thousands of tons of bombs in carpet bombing campaigns. While devastating on the ground, even these giants weren't untouchable. Several were lost to surface-to-air missiles during daring raids near Hanoi. And then there were the helicopters. The UH-1 Huey became the icon of Vietnam, ferrying troops into battle and pulling the wounded out under fire. Cobra gunships followed close behind, unleashing rockets and machine guns in support. But flying low over jungles was a death sentence if ambushed, and helicopter pilots endured some of the heaviest casualties of the war. Each of these aircraft represented cutting-edge technology for its time, but in the brutal conditions of Vietnam, thick jungles, hidden defenses, and relentless enemy fire, even the best machines proved vulnerable, leaving their pilots to fight for survival on every mission. If American pilots thought their advanced jets would guarantee dominance, North Vietnam's defenses quickly proved them wrong. With help from the Soviet Union, the North built a deadly shield in the skies. The most feared threat was the SA-2 Guideline surface-to-air missile. Standing nearly 35 feet tall and launched from camouflage sites, these weapons could hit targets more than 60,000 feet up. Pilots often spotted the telltale white smoke trails snaking toward them, giving only seconds to react. Dodging meant diving, rolling, and praying the missile lost its lock. But even if they escaped, every evasive maneuver made them easier prey for the guns below, and those guns were everywhere. Radar-guided anti-aircraft artillery was hidden throughout the jungles and villages. From 23mm cannons to giant 100mm batteries, they filled the skies with walls of shrapnel. A valley that seemed quiet one moment could instantly erupt with tracers and explosions. Pilots described flying through North Vietnam as like flying into a storm of metal. Adding to the danger were MiG fighters, sleek Soviet-built jets flown by skilled Vietnamese pilots. Directed by Ground Control Intercept, MiGs rarely fought on equal terms. Instead, they appeared suddenly, ambushing American formations before retreating back into protective airspace. For US pilots, it often felt like the enemy always knew where they were and was waiting. Together, missiles, flak, and fighters created one of the most dangerous air defense networks in modern history. American pilots never had certainty. Even the best trained crews knew that no matter how carefully they flew, survival often came down to luck. Each time they launched from a carrier deck or airbase, they had to face the chilling thought they might not be coming back. Beyond missiles and MiGs, the daily grind of flying in Vietnam was its own form of punishment. The heat was relentless. Cockpits turned into ovens under the tropical sun, where temperatures could soar above 100 degrees. Pilots sweated through their flight suits, helmets felt like furnaces, and dehydration was a constant threat. Some carried salt tablets just to stay functional on long missions. Those missions could stretch for hours. Fighter pilots might fly multiple sorties in a single day, sometimes pushing their bodies past exhaustion. Long bombing runs meant sitting strapped into a seat for endless hours, eyes straining at the horizon, nerves on edge. Even moments of routine carried the constant demand to stay alert, because danger could appear at any second. Helicopter pilots endured an even harsher reality. The UH-1 Hueys and Cobra gunships often had to descend into jungle clearings while under enemy fire. Dust, smoke, and bullets filled the air as they tried to land, unload troops, or evacuate the wounded. Every takeoff and landing carried the risk of ambush, and many helicopters never returned. On top of the physical demands came the psychological weight. Casualty rates among pilots were shockingly high. Squadrons often lost men week after week, and every empty chair at the ready room table was a stark reminder of the risks. Pilots lived with the knowledge that tomorrow's mission might be their last. All of this built a unique kind of stress. The cockpit was both a shield and a prison. Pilots felt safest when flying, yet they knew they were always a heartbeat away from disaster. Enduring the heat, fatigue, and constant tension was as much a test of willpower as of flying skill. For Vietnam pilots, daily hardship wasn't just part of the mission, it was the mission. For many pilots in Vietnam, the greatest fear wasn't the missiles or the flak, it was what happened if they were shot down. The odds were high. Between 1965 and 1973, hundreds of American aircraft were lost to enemy fire, and every mission carried the possibility of ejecting over hostile territory. Ejection itself was brutal. Blasting out of a jet at hundreds of miles per hour often left pilots with broken bones, concussions, or worse. Those who survived the descent by parachute then faced a new nightmare: capture. North Vietnamese soldiers and militia scoured crash sites, and downed pilots were prime trophies. Many ended up in prisoner of war camps, the most infamous being Hoa Lo Prison, nicknamed the Hanoi Hilton. Behind its walls, captured airmen endured years of captivity. They faced brutal interrogations, torture sessions designed to break their will, and constant pressure to sign propaganda statements. Communication with the outside world was almost non-existent, and survival depended on sheer resilience and solidarity with fellow prisoners. Some endured years of imprisonment. Commander James Stockdale spent 7 years as a POW. Senator John McCain was shot down in 1967 and spent over 5 years in captivity, suffering beatings and solitary confinement. Their stories became symbols of the courage and suffering of Vietnam pilots. Not every capture ended in survival. Conditions in the camps were harsh, and many never returned home. Yet even in captivity, some pilots attempted daring escapes, digging tunnels, or planning breakouts, though few succeeded. For those still flying, the risk was always on their minds. Every mission briefing carried the unspoken truth: if your plane goes down, the war isn't over, it's only just beginning. In Vietnam, the cockpit was dangerous, but falling into enemy hands could be far worse. Flying in Vietnam wasn't just a physical challenge, it was a mental battle that wore pilots down day after day. Every mission carried the weight of uncertainty. Would the missiles find their mark this time? Would the flak be too heavy? Would the MiGs be waiting? The constant stress built into a rhythm of fear and adrenaline that never truly let up. One of the hardest parts was watching squadron mates not return. Empty chairs in the ready room became a grim reality as losses were frequent. Pilots learned to carry on, to fly the next mission as if nothing had happened, but the grief was always there, simmering beneath the surface. Survivors described it as living with a countdown clock, never knowing whose number would be next. The fear of capture made everything worse. Pilots knew the risks of being shot down, not just death, but imprisonment in camps like the Hanoi Hilton. The thought of years of torture or isolation weighed heavily, and every time they strapped in, that possibility hung in the back of their minds. To cope, many turned to dark humor, jokes about thuds delivering themselves to the target, or flying $1 million plane into a nickel's worth of flak helped break the tension. Brotherhood also became a shield. Pilots leaned on each other, forming bonds that were often stronger than family ties. The routine of briefings, maintenance checks, and rituals gave structure to an otherwise chaotic world. But even with these coping mechanisms, the psychological toll was immense. Some pilots came home with scars that never healed, not just in their bodies, but in their minds. Vietnam proved that even the best trained aviators could be pushed to the breaking point, not only by enemy fire, but by the relentless strain of flying mission after mission, with survival never guaranteed. For all the danger, exhaustion, and loss, men still strapped themselves into cockpits and flew mission after mission. Part of it was pride. These pilots represented the very best of their generation, trained to master some of the most advanced machines ever built. Every takeoff was a test of their skill, and for many, proving they could face the most dangerous skies in the world was a point of honor. There was also a deep belief in the mission. Whether or not they agreed with the politics of the war, pilots understood their role: support the troops on the ground, disrupt enemy supply lines, and hold the line against communism. That sense of duty gave meaning to their sacrifices, even when the cost was high. But perhaps the most powerful reason was each other. The camaraderie inside squadrons was unlike anything else. Pilots knew their lives often depended on the man flying next to them, and that forged bonds as strong as steel. Loyalty to wingmen, to squadron mates, and to the crews who kept their planes flying was what carried many through the darkest days. In the end, their legacy is one of bravery. Despite impossible odds, they flew into danger again and again, not because it was safe, not because it was easy, but because it was their duty, and because they refused to let each other down. For Vietnam pilots, every mission was a gamble. Survival was never guaranteed. They flew through skies thick with flak, dodged missiles that seemed unstoppable, and faced the constant threat of capture or death. Yet, despite it all, they kept climbing into their cockpits, fueled by pride, loyalty, and the belief that their duty mattered. It's a reminder that behind every jet, every helicopter, every bombing run, were men risking everything, not for glory, but simply to make it back alive. Would you have had the courage to fly in Vietnam, knowing the odds stacked against you? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the harsh reality of air combat, don't forget to subscribe for more military archive breakdowns. More untold stories of war machines and the people behind them are on the way.